So this panel discussion really originated when we were thinking about what to present during the non-dilutive funding day, and we thought, well, there are so many great successes out there, and so much to learn from these individuals, and you know, we could go on and on about how great we are, but I think that hearing it from the field and having the people share their experience and how they went about getting such fantastic funding is a great way to go. I think in this table we have, I didn't use a calculator, but I think we have a little over $300 million to date. You guys willing to share some? No, they're not sharing. So, none left. Okay, even better. So it's time for more, I guess. Anyway, we do have 5 panelists here today. They were asked to prepare a slide deck, a short slide deck of their experience with non-dilutive funding, their strategy, successes, hardships, and so on. And they will one by one approach and present. So during their presentation, if we could keep the questions limited, that would be great. We will open up for discussion after the presentations, and I'm sure they'll be happy to answer. So first off, I'd like to have Russell Skibsted, CFO of AEOLUS Pharmaceuticals.
What AEOLUS has is essentially a mechanism of action where the compound not only protects healthy tissue against damage from radiation exposure, but also has, we've discovered, some of its own anti-cancer properties. And because of that, it's got dual use. So we're looking at it both in oncology and as a medical countermeasure, primarily against the pulmonary subsyndrome of acute radiation syndrome. So essentially, what the government's trying to do is prevent, in the event of a terrorist act, where you have, I mean, what they're planning for is a 10-kiloton explosion in a major population center. And what we've discovered over in history is that actually more people die from radiation exposure than die from the blast itself, because the radiation circle is so wide, and it tends to go anywhere from 5, 10, 20 miles downwind, depending on the weather at the time of the blast, that they realized that if they were able to protect citizens, they would maybe get a lot more survival after some sort of event like that. So we've been looking at various areas, both as a protectant against chemical vesicants like mustard and chlorine gas, but our primary, and we've got about $150 million of government funding so far in various programs, and I'll show you in a minute, but the largest of which is a BARDA contract to develop it, like I said, it's a pulmonary subsyndrome. And the nice part about the BARDA contract, and this was what really made it attractive for us, is not just the funding for the medical countermeasure aspect of it, but was the fact that so much of the work that we're doing is supportive of what we would be doing in oncology. And so it's everything from the CMC formulation work, we're doing all the way up to commercial scale up. It's doing all our tox work, all our preclinical work, and even paying for our, what's essentially the equivalent of our phase 1 in oncology with the healthy volunteer study. So for us, we estimate that it's probably, by the time the contract is done, we probably will have saved, I would say, about $50 million of in the work that will be done that we otherwise would have had to gone out and raise from private investors. And in today's environment, that's not so easy to do. So this is a breakdown of the government contracts we have. The largest one, of course, is the BARDA contract, but we've also got several NIAID, Counteract, NIH grants, looking at various other areas, as I mentioned, the nerve agents, the chemical vesicants, and we're even being looked at in the GI subsyndrome of acute radiation syndrome. So we're just completing our second year of the BARDA contract. It's the second of what was originally planned as a 5-year project. And so far we've been able to generate revenue, obviously. It's the BARDA contract itself is a cost-plus contract. So what we do is we bill them monthly for the costs that we incurred, and for the direct costs, like direct labor, direct materials that we incur, we get reimbursement for those costs, plus an overhead percentage, plus a profit percentage. And then with the subcontracted work that we do, we receive that, whatever that amount was, plus a small profit piece of it as well. So, excuse me. Now, we're a public company, and the way the BARDA funding mechanism works is it pays for a lot of our overhead, but it doesn't pay for all the costs of our overhead. For instance, it doesn't pay for, actually, interestingly, the cost of being a public company. So the additional SEC costs that we would have, the legal costs, the accounting costs, IRPR costs, and patent prosecution that we do. So, you know, although we're doing a lot of work, we still burn about $100,000 a month, which isn't bad considering the amount of work that's being done. The other thing I should mention is that there's a lot of work that goes into negotiating the contract initially. Large Gantt chart, we've worked out everything, but there is some flexibility within that chart, within the contract itself. And we were actually, in the first year, we were able to save enough money just on the first year of the contract that we were actually able to add additional deliverables into that base year. And then in this option that we had triggered, we were able to save additional money. So we've been able to add actually 18 additional deliverables that were actually planned to be started after, you know, option periods, but we were able to throw them in there. And so advice for dealing with BARDA, they like it when you save them money. They tend to be very cooperative, and they tend to, you know, pretty reasonable when you're able to do that. I was going to say one of the other things, one of the key things we were able to do is this: we reduced the manufacturing cost of our compound by 83%. So we had a compound that was not difficult to make, but it had a very low yield. And so one of the objectives was really to take a look at that and see if there was a way, it's not a formulation change, but a different way of manufacturing the compound. And with the BARDA-sponsored funding, we were actually able to, like I said, reduce the cost of manufacturing by 83%, which, again, is going to have a massive impact on our commercial side when we finally get it approved in oncology. So, you know, there were some real benefits to this. So I'm not going to go through this, but this is a list of all of the studies that are being done right now, paid for either by the BARDA contract or some of the grants that we're looking at. So there's quite a bit going on right now that, you know, for our $100,000 a month burn. I won't go into the data, but this was a study that actually was what got us originally invited to submit a proposal to BARDA, and this was showing that essentially a mouse study where we had, the radiation dose was actually well above the LD100 radiation dose, and yet we were still able to deliver 90% survival, and that's, you know, pretty substantial results. So that is the basis on which our contract was built. We also had a non-human primate study where we were able to likewise deliver some pretty significant survival benefits at a well above LD100 radiation dose. Oncology. So I mentioned it, you know, the BARDA contract is great, and it pays for a lot of the costs that we would be otherwise paying for, and we're using it in oncology. Not to mention the fact there's a potential procurement, and at this point, we're, per our schedule, we're within roughly a year of submitting an emergency use authorization, which will now allow the government to begin procuring the drug. And so, and in oncology, being able to do this, you know, the reason our drug will work pretty well in oncology is because, again, not only if it protects against radiation, then potentially we can increase the radiation dose. But, you know, radiation, it was funny, I was talking to an investor, it was a little over a year ago. He was like, radiation, you never read about it. It's boring. It's, you know, it's right. But its use is increasing 15% a year. Half of all cancer patients have radiation at some point. And quite frankly, it works. It's just not very sexy. It's not very exciting. It's not targeted. It's not immunotherapy, but it works. And in fact, I asked the question this guy happened to be a radiation oncologist, and I asked him, I said, well, what would happen if you had a tumor and you blasted it with 500 gray of radiation? And he just laughed. He said, well, you'd kill the tumor. Great. Then why don't you do it? Damage to healthy tissue. Right. So if you can protect the healthy tissue, maybe you can get more radiation, and maybe you can create more survival and better effects in treating cancer. It's not targeted, it's not, but it works. So this is where we think the overall largest opportunity is for our compound, and a lot of the cost is because, again, not a real sexy area. So, the funding sources don't want to throw tons of money into sort of boring but effective therapies. So we're utilizing the funding, the government funding, to get a lot of data and to do a lot of work that we would otherwise be spending. So, and again, here's some of the study we have. So what I would say to you if you're looking at it is really look at more than just the funding itself, but look at what else it can do for you and what that advantage might be. And try not to be too, have too much tunnel vision over, exactly the work that's being done, but look at it broadly. Because we found that BARDA is actually very encouraging of non-government use of the research that they're providing, because obviously it adds more value to the country, to the environment, and to our economy. So I guess that's all I have. Thank you. Thanks for putting up with my voice.
Thank you very much. We'll now move over to Genvec, to Cindy Collins, CEO.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be able to present Genvec here this morning. First of all, I wanted to just give you an overview of the company. We also are a publicly traded company. We're listed on NASDAQ. We just celebrated our 20-year anniversary. We began as a gene therapy company. Our technology platform is adenoviral vectors. We are experts in genetic engineering, and we apply our efforts both in the area of therapeutics as well as vaccines. We have had a great history of very successful partnerships with pharma companies such as Novartis and Sanofi Mariel, which is the animal health division of Sanofi, but also, more importantly, with government agencies such as the Department of Homeland Security, the U.S. Navy, the NIH, and the USDA. Our funding sources are, of course, varied. We are a public company, so we do receive some sources of funding from public markets. We have had, as I said, a number of successful pharmaceutical relationships, and while some may consider that non-dilutive funding, I would argue that in some cases it's really not non-dilutive. You have to give up an awful lot of product rights and sometimes even equity positions as well. And of course, we receive a great deal of money through the government. We have a very strong intellectual property portfolio focused around our vector technology, our packaging cell lines, and our proprietary antigens. And we have a great deal of development and manufacturing expertise. We do our own manufacturing. We have experience from phase 1 to phase 3. We do outsource some of that, and we have developed very efficient and robust manufacturing processes. In terms of non-dilutive funds, Genvec has received $206 million in non-dilutive funding over its history, and you can see the breakout between government contracts, collaborators, and grants. And if we look at that funding by program, you can see that it varies substantially by program, and partially that's driven by the amount of funds that may have been available for the particular area of interest, the duration of the project when we were working on it. We did a great deal of work in the area of HIV, developing an HIV vaccine, and you can see that we were able to secure a large amount of money. And so one of the things that we, of course, look at is, when money is available, what is the order of magnitude of funding available for various types of opportunities, and think about whether or not our technology is appropriately suited to pursue that particular area. This is an eye chart. The only message I wanted to really convey here is over the history of the company, you can see that the amount of money coming in varies substantially. It was as low as $4 million in one year and as high as $26 million in others. And so that presents a few management challenges, and you have to think about staffing and resources and how you manage your programs overall. And then lastly, I wanted to just leave you with some considerations to think about as you are going after non-dilutive funding. There are different types of contracts that you can structure, a fixed fee versus cost plus, If you really understand your cost structure well and you have a very good idea about timelines and milestones, fixed fee is a great way to go. If not, cost plus is certainly worth considering. You also have to have the appropriate accounting and timekeeping systems in place to manage the grants once you have them on board, and those may or may not be the same types of systems that you use to manage your other projects where you're not receiving government funding. Staffing management, I mentioned a little bit with the previous slide, but clearly you're not always certain if you're going to receive approval for a grant, and those grants or contracts have durations, and so when they expire you have to secure new funding. So the actual management of people on and off projects is something that I think we do very well as an organization. Timelines, I think most people would argue that non-dilutive funding doesn't necessarily help your project go faster. Even though it's a great source of income, you have to apply for new grants or new contracts, and again, the certainty is always a question. Ownership of rights, sometimes you have to give up some intellectual property rights, etc. You may not have total control over the clinical development strategy, and all of those items are clearly negotiable, and I would encourage you to think about what you want out of it and to negotiate those rights up front. And then lastly, resources and skills to manage the process. We don't have dedicated resources within GenVec to manage this. We don't have a single person or two that do only government contracting. It's very much distributed, from monitoring when grant money is available, for which projects. Putting those applications together is a concerted effort between admin, finance, and R&D. And then once you secure those grants, managing those, of course, again, administration and finance play a very big role as well. I know a lot of other companies have dedicated resources. As a business, we've decided not to do that. So with that, I'd like to say thank you and present the next speaker.
Thank you very much. So presenting now will be Stephen Hoffman from SANARIA.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Good morning to everybody. SANARIA is a bit different than some of the other companies going for government funding, in that our own primary and in fact only mission is to develop a malaria vaccine, which definitely puts us in the non-dilutive arena. We have two initial markets. One is travelers and military personnel, which is actually quite a substantial high-margin market, but it gets overshadowed, certainly in the minds of investors, by the developing world market, where our goal is to develop a vaccine that could be used for geographically focused parasite elimination campaigns. To be successful in these markets, either one of them, the vaccine will have to prevent Plasmodium falciparum malaria, which is responsible for 99% of all deaths, and at least 80% of recipients for at least 6 months, and preferably greater than 90% for several years. So that's a big challenge. I thought it might be interesting, given what we've had to approach, just to give you a little bit of background about myself and the company, and how we've been able to approach this from a non-dilutive point of view. I'm a tropical infectious disease specialist. I was in the Navy for 21 years, where I ran the Navy's malaria programs. I was the senior vice president of biologics at Solera Genomics when the human genome was sequenced. And then I founded SANARIA a year or so later, initially as an LLC in my house, and then with the first SBIR grant, which we got on July 1st, 2003, we moved to what was then 800 square feet in a place that was described in National Geographic as a dismal strip mall in Rockville, Maryland. We then continued to get SBIRs and a number of other grants, which I'll show you, and with a $30 million grant from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, we were able to design and build the world's first, and in fact the world's only, clinical manufacturing facility for a whole parasite malaria vaccine, and that's where we've been since the present, to the present, And we have 3 different whole malaria sporozoid parasite products in clinical trials at 10 sites in the United States, Europe, and Africa. There are some obstacles to raising funds to develop a malaria vaccine. The first, of course, is that when you tell people that you want to make hundreds of millions of doses to immunize entire populations in the developing world to eliminate the disease and thereby prevent millions of deaths, that puts off investors, even if you bring up the fact that there is a high margin, travelers market and military market. There has been a lot of difficulty and faith, particularly in industry and in investment community, about whether it's actually possible to develop a highly effective malaria vaccine. And I can tell you that it is. And then, of course, there's the overall cost of developing a new vaccine, which, if you read in whatever literature you read, is estimated to be between $1 billion and $1.5 billion a year. So that's a pretty, how you lay that out and how you're going to develop, get the funding for all of that is sometimes problematic. So what we've been able to do is to fund our entire program, almost the entire program, with non-dilutive funds, which have included competitive SBIRs, a congressional earmark when that was available, funds from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, funds from a Dutch nonprofit in collaboration with 2 Dutch universities, the European Vaccine Initiative, in which we competed directly, which is it's an EU-funded endeavor, and we got the first U.S. PI grant ever in their history. The state of Maryland, we have parasite byproducts, monoclonal antibodies, recombinant proteins even, that are kind of byproducts and reagents that we use, that we actually sell to the research community. And we have had a small equity investment, but really represents less than 1 or 2% of what we've had to spend. We've also been quite fortunate in that we've gotten support for all of our clinical trials by other government institutions, universities, and NGOs in North America, Europe, and Africa. And I've said that means more than 10 clinical trials in 3 continents in 8 to 9 different countries. Our first clinical trial was published in October of 2011 in Science. It's the first research article on a malaria vaccine clinical trial ever published in Science. So we do good science. And we're currently now finished with our second major clinical trial of our irradiated sporozoid vaccine, which was funded by it was conducted at the Vaccine Research Center at the NIH. The NIH has the world's largest malaria vaccine development laboratory, which, if you include in overhead, has a burn rate of about $20 million a year. But this is actually the first clinical trial of a malaria vaccine ever conducted at the NIH Vaccine Research Center, funded by the NIH. And it was a safety, tolerability, immunogenicity, and protective efficacy study. And the results should be submitted for publication next week, and they're a lot better than the Science paper results. So we're quite excited. And then we have a trial that's going to start in a month or 2 at the Ifakara Health Institute in Tanzania. This is the first trial in the history of Africa funded where a vaccine trial, or perhaps any new intervention, was actually funded by an African government. And that's going to start in a few months in Tanzania. So using non-dilutive funds to get to the point where we're at right now, I thought I would just kind of list what we think we offer potential investors because of the foundation from our greater than 80 million in non-dilutive funds, and probably another 10 or 20 million in funds that were used to run clinical trials that never came through us, but were run by our collaborators. So we've basically eliminated the preclinical and phase 1 risk for our product. We've built a clinical manufacturing facility and established the team and the track record with the FDA that we actually can manufacture. We've established a management team. We have a global network of committed clinical development partners who actually are clamoring to raise funds themselves to test our vaccine. We've published in prestigious journals. We have accomplished regulatory QA and QC teams. And now our R&D program in-house is focused on increasing efficiency and scale-up of the manufacturing process to go hand in hand with the clinical development program. As mentioned by some of my colleagues earlier, what you don't get any funds for, which I'm scrambling for all the time, is intellectual property management, which is a big part of what we do, but you just can't get that money, and so you kind of get it on the edges. As well as it's pretty hard to get a grant to support your regulatory team, your QA team, your QC team. You get grants for doing science, you get grants for doing clinical trials, but and now we get grants. I have to send teams to all of these sites all over the world. They're paying for the clinical trial, but I have to get my people there to do the audits and actually formulate the vaccine. So it's a struggle, but it's a pretty exciting one in that we've been able to get to this point without essentially any dilution. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now move over to Kentucky Bioprocessing. You hate it?
Thank you for the opportunity. Pardon me, Russ has infected me already. Fortunately, there's a team of biopharmaceutical developers here that will take care of us before we leave. Our company, obviously based in Kentucky, I've listened to some of these other presentations, and we're somewhat smaller than some of my colleagues on the panel, and we're certainly not a public company. In fact, we're about as private as you can be. Our business is focused around using transient expression of biopharmaceutical proteins in tobacco plants. We run a 120,000 square foot biopharmaceutical manufacturing facility in Kentucky. Most of that space is occupied by indoor, automated, environmentally controlled growth of plants, but it also includes a full suite of downstream analytical development, QA, QC resources that allow us to produce biopharmaceutical proteins in the tobacco system at a CGMP level. A couple of different expression technologies that we use, one of which is proprietary to ourselves, the other is in-licensed from our collaborators at Icon Genetics in Germany, and you'll see in a bit where we have worked with Icon to attract some non-dilutive financing to be able to adapt our other pre-existing facilities to utilize their technology and allow an outlet for utilization of their technology. The slide here really is intended to represent the fact that in our platform we have the ability to take a product from concept all the way up to CGMP production. We have a full range of capabilities. Probably where we run out of capacity is at the finish and fill level. We certainly can do aseptic fill in class 100 space, but not at the kind of huge volume that you would ultimately need to take a product to commercialization. Our company was established in 2006. We have today 32 employees, adding people as we go along, experience in FDA, and again, because of our utilization of the tobacco system, we have a good deal of interaction with the USDA as well. Experience producing all types of proteins. Our focus today increasingly moves around production of monoclonal antibodies, although we do a variety of different products in our system. The last bullet there, kind of a hybrid business model. I see some similarities from some of the other panelists here, but compare KBP to the platypus here. If you're an investor on the outside looking in, you might not recognize what are we? Are we a platform company? Are we a product company? What is it that we're selling? And it can be a bit confusing, and so to the extent that we were interested in presenting ourselves to an investor, it's a little bit of a difficult story to tell. Am I right about that, Mark? Mark has looked at us from time to time. The last bullet there, I am venomous, but I rarely bite. So So our revenue model, again, kind of goes back to the platypus model. We can derive revenue, we derive service or activity from essentially sale of our platform, producing products for other people, either on a fee for service, contract production. We have developed technology for a fee for collaborators. And all of these things lead to, again, the message up here, as we do these things on a non-dilutive basis, we derive revenue, but we're improving our platform as we do that. That platform revenue then slides over to help us to develop products that we are interested in. And those products are that we're able to derive revenue from. We have a focus on biodefense and what we call global health. That would be products that might be of interest in a humanitarian setting, but very little commercial interest, not something that big pharmaceutical would want to invest in. Licensing, partnering, and all the things that a small biopharmaceutical company would be interested in terms of producing revenue. Since I mentioned that our company's been around since 2006, and the non-dilutive financing since 2008 is when our financing in this method really took off. Probably a few hundreds of thousands of dollars or perhaps $1 million that I could cite prior to 2008, but the focus came in since 2000, since that point in time. It's hard to tell from the slide, but the first two items there are highlighted because those were non-dilutive cash injections that really went toward developing and validating our production platform, and that's about $20 million. Interesting, you see on here, and I do consider these non-dilutive investments in our company, where most of this has come from government sources, but we have been able to attract about $5 million in non-dilutive financing from private partners, a couple of Fortune 100 companies that have put money into our company for the sake of validating and developing technology that they develop. So in other words, they took away from that relationship nothing in terms of intellectual property that they didn't own before they came to us. They took no equity in our company. We provided them something in return, and were able to use the accrued value to our own benefit. We've been, as I said, from the time we were established in 2006, we've taken in, this represents about a little over $30 million in non-dilutive financing, and we have the exact same cap table today that we had in 2006. Have not diluted a bit. Just in terms of advice that I might add to the panelists that have been presented thus far, and some of the comments that were made this morning, I would suggest to you, particularly as you approach government sources, but I think the same is true with private sources as well, to the extent that we've had success there, is don't be afraid to start small. In the end, you're not dealing with the government, or you're not dealing with a big company, you're dealing with a person or a couple of people. And so to the extent that you can start small, under-promise and over-perform, you establish a relationship, you establish credibility, and our experience is as you do that, they'll find you. Once that program manager, whether it's at a government agency or whether it's in a bigger company, once you have established credibility, you've established that you will do what you say you'll do, and if you're not going to do it, you're going to have communication back and forth, those people will start to find you, and you won't have to go looking for non-dilutive financing. You'll start to make decisions about which parts of that you want to take advantage of. So we'll be glad to talk a little bit more in the Q&A period, but I think that probably wraps up the introduction of my company.
And last but not least, Novodyne, Will Joseph.
Hi, my name is Will Joseph. Here to share with you the story of Novodyne, the non-dilutive story. on scale, we're a smaller company, especially in comparison to the other stories that you've just heard, but it's a fine example of how non-dilutive funding can help a vaccine company, an early stage vaccine company, which you all well know, venture has been very difficult, especially for vaccine companies. So the non-dilutive story that I'm about to share with you is really a component that helped our company launch and get to where it's at today, as well as preserve equity. The company itself was started and founded by experts at world's experts at UCLA LA Biomed. They discovered a vaccine based on the AEOLUS 3 antigen that worked against Candida initially. We later determined that the same vaccine also had indication to work against staph, particularly MRSA. About the time that I met the company, we had approached the Army, and there was the idea that potentially the Army had use for a staph vaccine, and ultimately we raised our first grant, which I'll talk about a little bit more. But about that time that we had an indication that we would receive some non-dilutive funding, we were introduced to Domain Associates and subsequently raised a sizable Series A investment. The lead product that we have is the NDV3 vaccine that works against staph. We actually have completed two successful phase 1s, and are looking to continue on a phase 2 efficacy study for the Candida portion of that vaccine. So it's the first ever single antigen cross-kingdom vaccine. So it's a very, very special product. We're pretty proud of it, and obviously we're excited about the potential impact it can have in the patient groups. As you can see, they're fairly sizable, even just Candida by itself. Overview of the non-dilutive story. We prior to the Domain Series A, we actually received a very small grant from Army. It was about $1 million. And at the time, the technology had been developed at Harbor UCLA LA Biomed through R01 grants. And as we formed the company, we ultimately raised, NIH came along and actually added $5 million for preclinical development, as they knew that we were heading down the commercialization path. That happened about the same time that we received the Series A. And so it was the Series A from Domain is a tranched investment. So this allowed us the flexibility to delay the investment as well as take on other non-dilutive funding. Being an LA, a biotech company in Los Angeles, as you know, it's not necessarily the hotbed of activity for biotech startups. So we had difficulty finding facilities. It was at this time that we were introduced to economic development at North Dakota. They were interested in bringing biotech expertise and companies to the region, and ultimately built a facility that had all of our specs, a brand new facility called React 1, and we estimate the capabilities at about the investment about $12 million in facilities, of which we now have our company headquartered in Grand Forks. So to date, the Army funding, of which we've received congressional support also from North Dakota, has totaled about $12 million, as well as $5 million from NIH and about $12 million of in-kind investment from the state of North Dakota. The facility itself, as I said, we ultimately headquartered the company in North Dakota, 5,000 square feet. We're looking to expand there as well, especially with we're bringing in starting a new program with HYR1 that works Candida and Acinetobacter. Full capability to help support our phase 1, phase 2 studies. Proximity to University of North Dakota Medical School, and the human capital. Many people sometimes they frown upon some of these Midwest states, but we have been quite impressed with the level of expertise that we've been able to find. Actually, our director of research operations wanted to move back to Grand Forks, where he grew up. He left Dendreon, where he had worked there for several years, and has done a fine job. Everybody that we've been able to hire has been remarkable. And as Ayala asked, provide some words of wisdom. So, being a small startup company, looking at what it is that at the critical path that you need to take, it's very important that you look at all the agencies. Even if you've won a contract or are looking to apply to a contract, you should look at agencies almost as a portfolio of opportunities and the connected nature of these agencies if you want to continue your path for development. And it's at the same time, just as you would a business development deal, you should have backup plans with other agencies on your non-dilutive plan. Sometimes this funding can be complementary. Sometimes it can be a program that it can be a backup strategy. In any case, you should look at everything and map out and try to understand at what point does NIH funding run out and who takes it on, and what's the criteria for working with the next agency. And regarding that, when you apply to some of these programs, make sure that you understand your program diligence. There are many things that come down the line that can be a surprise. And at Novodyne, we've had a couple of these surprises, to be quite frank. We particularly understanding what are the patient groups as you enter into some of these clinical studies. Some of these patient groups are protected, like military recruits. Army has what they call a requirements document. Trying to understand what goes into that requirements document. Sometimes these requirement documents take up to 7 years, and they don't start the process until you've finished your phase 1 safety study. As far as program management is concerned, try to foster as much a continuous relationship with your program manager. Your program manager is your champion, and as much as you can impress upon them the science, it's also equally important to make sure that they also understand what you're doing on the business side with your company. It's the risk, especially as if you followed the news more recently, there is risk for people within federal agencies, and what you do with your company financially, legally, factors in. Secondly, utilize the relationships within your program manager. As a program manager, they want to see these things succeed, and as your champion, they should also understand what are what other agencies you can work with after their role has completed, and start those other relationships as soon as possible. And if you have congressional support, I suggest strongly that you consider using it, particularly if you're in a state that has a congressional office or an economic development office that would like to be helpful. And so